Hello and welcome, my fellow friends and streamers, to the channel here. Real quick, we're going to go ahead and touch on today about the encoding overload error that may show up when trying to stream from either a single PC setup or dual PC setup, or even a dual PC setup that runs from the main system through NDI, which is the internet, instead of a direct cable management there as well. All of those options there fall in line with some of the info that I have gathered and tried to troubleshoot upon, because I kept running into the same error for about a week, almost a week and a half, where everything was working fine before, and it just dropped off, and just constant errors, constant frame drops, even low performance games like simple things like maybe like Minecraft, or even like what do you call it, faster than light, or just stuff that doesn't take up a lot of performance overall, but it kept dropping off constantly. Couldn't figure out why, and then started some digging and found some consistencies and some extra information that may help you. So I'm going to go ahead and start off on some talking points, and use what information as you see fit, and we'll go from there. So to start off with, of course, before you get anywhere, always make sure your stuff is up to date. From time to time, there are versions of the programs or your graphics drivers and whatnot that may perform better than others. That does come with the territory of the technology, but overall, as much as possible, you do want to make sure everything is up to date. So that's the given point right there. So make sure your drivers for your graphics are up to date. Make sure your OBS program is up to date. That's OBS regular, OBS Studio, and Streamlabs OBS, which those are the entities I currently am aware of right now. So make sure all those things are up to date. You can always check them in your settings. Like for me here, I can always check that here in the GeForce Experience, which is since I'm NVIDIA, I can make sure latest up to date. Check for updates, and then OBS. When you open the program, you can also make sure to check for updates in there and as well as online. So first point is admin mode. Okay, admin mode is generally encouraged more than anything else when people run into issues dealing with the inconsistencies of lag or latency with their overall gaming to output via streaming, or just regular video to output via streaming there for themselves. So if possible, not everybody can, of course, but if possible, try to run your OBS program in admin mode. So go to your install folder there. Generally, mine is on a separate drive, but you go to OBS Studio, and then you want to go to bin, and then whichever iteration is operating on your system, 32 or 64. Mine is a 64-bit. Then go all the way down to OBS, right-click for properties, and then go to compatibility section and make sure that the check for run this program as admin is on there for yourself. That generally helps to force a system to overcome any kind of back-end issues with operating the program, because it doesn't see it as just a commonplace program running in the background that wants to be ignored. So we want to keep that on the forefront, especially when you're streaming, because got to keep it up to date. But anyway, so once you have the admin mode enabled, of course, go ahead and bring it up there. I have on the side here, you may see some monitoring programs that I've got going on. The amount of programs that you have, depending on your system, only you know your system best, of course, and just kind of tinkering around with it. You would know yourself how many programs and stuff in the background would be optimal for you. They should not, in any circumstance, interfere with your streaming capability there, as long as you have room to operate outside of that. So right now, I'm only running like 16% CPU and 15% on my GPU right now, because I don't got a lot going on right now. But like during a high-end game session, maybe this will go to 60 to 80% maybe, and this may go to 60 to 70 or so. So as long as there's overhead to still do what you need to without any kind of lag or skipping around, you're good there. All right, so let's bounce back to OBS real quick for ourselves. So one of the main things that you want to do and check on after you open OBS in admin mode, especially if you're trying to see the differences if your performance improves, is this little stat window that shows up. Now, I'm not sure about Streamlabs OBS, but for standard OBS, they have a built-in stat monitoring here that you can enable and move to your heart's content. I move mine to the top here, but you can put it on the side, the bottom, wherever on that there. And that's going to be under your docs for yourself. So you can go ahead and go under View, go to Docs, and then go to Stats right here. And that'll go ahead and give you a stat option there, and you can move it as you need to take a look at that. Because what happened is whenever the encoding overload or encoding lag took place, it could not render enough frames to make sure everything was as smooth as possible. So there was a lot of red that would show up in this top area, and then there's skip frames because it couldn't even process it within the given amount of time that is programmed into the software there for ourselves. So it's causing a big problem. Lots of red, lots of issues, FPS dropping up and down, even though I set it at 60. Just a pain all around. So, of course, for your system there, everybody's is going to be different depending on what their hardware is that's going to be supporting their gameplay. Generally, if you have enough cores and have enough power behind your CPU, usually the absolute definitive quality is the X264 encoder, which is going to be under output here, and that is via your CPU. Granted, it may not always be the best choice because it can be very demanding depending on which level you choose, because the higher quality, more demanding output that it requires, and that can easily cause overload as well. So for my instance, I don't use 264. I'll use that for my separate laptop to output via my NDI secondary computer setup there. So, standard for that there. You want to make sure your settings match, encoding, everything matches there. You don't want anything out of place. Of course, when you are dealing with, you only want to rescale once, of course. You don't want to downscale twice for yourself because you've got your base resolution. My computer runs at 1440, but I want my base resolution to be 1980 because the less times it has to downscale, the less quality that is lost every time it has to do so, whether it be on the source computer or on the secondary computer. So I do 1080, and then if I got to output somewhere else, I'll downscale it to my preferred resolution there for us. So main thing is make sure your settings are correct. Of course, there's X264 for CPU, and then there's NVENC for graphics options there. Or, sorry, graphics cards, my bad. Sorry. NVENC is for NVIDIA graphics cards. That's the built-in encoder chip that is in the card itself. For a lot of newer graphics cards, even some older ones that go back maybe about 5 years or so, if I'm not mistaken on that. So making sure all your settings are optimal for your system. There's plenty of tutorials just to make sure that you have everything tweaked as necessary for your particular setup. So don't look at mine as a complete reference. I've got quality 6000 for Twitch, and then often enough times if you stream to like YouTube or somewhere else that accepts a higher bit rate, you can boost it to 8000 plus to get the maximum, especially if you're trying to go for those higher end resolution options there. I turned off look ahead, especially if I do NVENC, because that just causes more utilization from the GPU that seems to be unnecessary, even if there's the high action sequences there for yourself. So making sure all this is correct, that's the primary setup there, is getting that in play. So one of the main things I noticed that I wasn't aware of up until this point was the color profile. Highly important that your color profile is in tune with your gaming for yourself. So often enough times I found out that a lot of browsers and a lot of devices nowadays, they are set to the standard of the 709 partial for themselves. A lot of them do not support fully the full color range there. So there is easily a drop-off of performance if you are going straight for color range full. Granted, if you are doing like recording for yourself there, You can use color range full, and it's not as big of a problem. But when you are streaming, you want to keep everything as streamlined as possible. Streamlined, but yeah, you want to keep everything as streamlined as possible without any kind of skips or interruptions there. So keeping your color range partial, you can choose 601 or 709 for your color space. Either one is fine there. 709 puts a little bit more out for yourself than 601. But you can compare the differences and see what works best for you on your preview there. Of course, a common renderer for OBS is 3D11 and NV12. These other ones are more so for recording options and not streaming per se, like i420, i444, and RGB. So generally, they're not the main go-tos for ourselves there. So what you want to go ahead and do there is, of course, at the top, process priority. That is process priority allows your program for OBS to become elevated in the system there, so it relies on the encoder to come first and then convert the frames from the gaming a bit quicker for yourself there. So some people say go to high, some people say go to above normal. The option that shows in OBS is specifically only going to affect if you are doing CPU encoding. So I do both for the process priority options. I'm going to show you the other one here in just a second. But process priority here, I keep it above normal. I don't do high because there's not really too much of a difference between above normal and high. But if you do CPU processing priority, that would be where your go-to is in this program, is do above normal. Make sure your profile for color is correct. Partial, make sure that's set. If you use a graphics card, a capture card, my bad. If you use a capture card for yourself, like Elgato or AverMedia, stuff like that, you want to make sure your profile matches on that too, because there can be an issue if you decide to use two separate profiles and try to output them at the same time. So for this instance here, granted, you can already see that at the top there is a little bit of rendering lag because I'm recording right now, but when it's not recording, that usually stays 0 for ourselves. So right now, if we go into like Elgato, which is my capture card that's outputting from my PlayStation there, it is giving us the options down here. For the video format, UYVY is the option here for the video format. Color space 709 and color range is partial. Before, it used to default to full, so make sure that that is partial right there. Some people in tutorials will mention going into your console settings and going to your sound and screen if you do a capture card, and making sure that your RGB range, which is the color range like I mentioned, is set to limited or full. But not all consoles support that. Granted, Xbox and PlayStation, they have options in their settings to do so, but stuff like the Switch, or if you use older console systems, that's not really relevant. So I usually just ignore that information. So making sure that the incoming from whatever console that you have is matching up with your outgoing as well for your OBS there too. So partial, either 709 or 601, just as before, as I mentioned, and then all your other settings to match what you're needing there for yourself. So there is that. And then the next thing here is the secondary prioritization. So we've already covered in the main settings there is that you set your process priority in OBS to above normal or high, whichever works, and that will elevate the rendering capabilities, especially if you're on a CPU encoding option there, which is X264. But if you want to do graphics for yourself and you're still encountering problems, then there's a secondary option. Now, from what I found, I haven't found a way to do this automatically, so I have to do this every time I load OBS. But if you go to your task manager and then go to your OBS program over here, where is it? There it is, right there, and select your main process for OBS. It's going to have a bunch of little extra windows depending on what you're running. So just go ahead and right-click the actual process here and go to Details. It's going to take you to this other tab down here. you want to right-click that and set the process priority as above normal. So what this does is that instead of just the CPU priority, like what OBS already does by itself, this accounts for the CPU and GPU process priority there. So that way your GPU is factored in as well, because a lot of people right now, especially if it's very demanding games, there's a lot of CPU bottleneck games that they need the CPU and they cannot do streaming on the CPU. So stuff like NVENC or the AMD option there, they'll render it from their GPU. So they got to make sure that is keeping up to speed for themselves. If you saw here, there was some more jumps up and down in the OBS program because I didn't have my priority on. It was on regular. So right now, so far I'm not seeing any new numbers even though I'm recording right now, but you did see a moment ago that it was going red. It dropped down to like 48, and I got like 105 frames that were missing due to rendering lag. So it did not catch those. So now that I have processing priority there, my GPU is factored in as well as my CPU there. So we've got that correct there. Now, if you do a GPU encoding, which is NVIDIA or AMD for yourself, or even the upcoming Intel, I'm sure they'll probably have something going there too. Windows has a other option that it implemented in one of its more recent updates called GPU scheduling. I think it's been out for like a year or so, if I'm not mistaken. But GPU scheduling, some people will recommend it, some people won't. People are a bit more divided when it comes to that. But what it's going to be located, if you look up graphics settings on your search bar here for Windows 10 or above, and then go into your graphics settings there, it'll take you to the subsection of the Windows settings, and there's going to be a check mark that says hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. What that is that it's supposed to reduce latency and improve performance for your GPU output there for yourself. So what happens is, by default, whenever you run a game or a game is brought up via regular status as a standalone or like an emulator or any of those operations there, what happens is Windows by default wants to manage your overall RAM there for yourself, whether it be the standard RAM sticks in your system or the onboard virtual RAM that comes with each graphics card to operate the performance there for yourself. So by default, Windows wants to manage that. So not always is it in tune, because your CPU might be communicating to your motherboard, I want this information pulled, and the GPU might be slightly behind. And those small ticks can add up over time and cause the CPU and graphics to not be in line with each other, and could cause some drops in performance or just the quality of the frames that are generated there for yourself. So there is a little caveat to the hardware GPU scheduling there. In some instances, depending on your hardware, there may be a slight drop off on frames there. It's pretty negligible in most instances, but you usually would see your games respond a bit more quicker whenever you click a button. Usually wants to go ahead and keep in time with that as much as possible, because the GPU is the one that's prioritizing the actions there. In that same spectrum there for the encoding chip, those same GPU primary actions there will allow your GPU to distinguish to your CPU and stream output that, hey, this is what we need in the game to be done. So we're going to take control instead of Windows, and we're going to dictate how much power we need to run the game, as well as maintain your stream output as much as possible without skips and errors and whatnot there for yourself. So there is that. So GPU scheduling, totally optional, but maybe worth a shot there. When you do enable it, it does require a computer restart, so keep in mind about that as well. Last but not least, Another very important piece of information that I found while going over options to reduce overload there is that the streaming standards for whatever platform you're going to there, the settings changed in OBS. So before, what you used to be able to do, I don't remember how many versions back, it's probably like version 24 and below or something like that there. What you used to be able to do is you used to be able to go into the output section here, and there was a button that you'd click on that said enforce streaming standards or requirements there for yourself. And what that did is that whatever limits that platform had, it would try to limit the bit rate of the max to meet that requirement there for yourself. So for like Twitch, for instance, if you're not a partner there for yourself and you're like an affiliate or regular user, the max that you can do is 6,000 kilobits per second, or just 6 megabits per second there overall. The problem was, I found as well, is that despite even the newer updates from the developers where OBS will by default try to keep in line the recommendations, I still had a bunch of jumps. So stream would be going along fine, be at 6,000, maybe like 6,100 or 6,200, just on like high action areas where you need just a little bit more. And then all of a sudden it would jump to 7,000 or 8,000 or some instances 9, and then all the way drop down to 0. And it was just awful. And if there's too many jumps, the server will reject your connection and you'll just get dropped off. And that's running either directly through to the streaming platform or running through a third-party option there to communicate to your platform, like Restream, for instance there. You just jumped constantly. I couldn't figure out why. I had no idea. I did a little digging, and I found out that there is... they technically moved, the developers said that they moved the option to the stream section here. So this is just one of the closest servers, for instance, on that. Got all my details there, yada, yada. And then by default, when this box is unchecked, it will try to use the recommendations set by the service that you select. So for like Twitch right here, it wants to make sure that it meets the maximum bit rate of 6,000 with the maximum audio bit rate of 320 there for yourself. So that's fine. When you check this off, your stream may become a lot more unstable because on that instance, you're trying to ignore the recommended settings, and that's only the case if you know what you're doing for yourself. So highly unrecommended there. So in order to make sure that stays in line, I went around, looked through some forums, and I found this little piece of code that's in OBS program itself that all of a sudden started to give me a lot better performance on the back end after all the other steps that I did that I mentioned already there. So since there's not an official button to click on that says enforce the limits there, naturally myself and other users assumed that it's already automatic. But what I found is that it is not always automatic there. What it says is that there's this line of code that you can add to the INI of the OBS program that runs in the background, and it's part of the base foundation of how the program runs, that will force the program to make sure to always do a check to enforce streaming bitrate limits. It's a simple little addition, but it makes a big difference. And this is for, like I said, the single PC, dual PC via cable, or dual PC via the network. Works on every instance of that. If you use a secondary PC for yourself, you have to make sure that this setting is up to date in both instances of OBS. So both the source computer and the output computer. If you're using it on both or using it on one, wherever you're going to be outputting, make sure that it lines up. Okay, I'm back. So I did find the overall file there for ourselves. I was looking in the wrong area. That's my bad there. So as I was trying to state there for ourselves is that we want to actually go to the install folder there, not OBS. I'm sorry, I did navigate that for myself there. So we want to go to the installation folder. It's actually shown right here what the option is for ourselves. So we want to go back to the installation folder, which will be, for me, it's going to be over here, OBS. and OBS Studio. It's going to be under the data, so the path is OBS data locale en.us .ini there for ourselves. So depending on your language, that's also going to be where your ini file is going to be located. So for me, it's going to be English, so bin 64 bin, oh, I'm sorry, data OBS Studio. Here we go. So it's OBS Studio, data, OBS Studio, locale. Find your language, depending on which one you're using there for yourself. US is English.us or -US. So open this up. One of the best programs I found to locate this info for better view is Notepad++, but you can use the regular one there for yourself just the same. So what this is that this is a lot of back-end basic settings that run with the software whenever you operate OBS there for yourself. So one of them, as it shows here, is called the Enforce Streaming Service Bitrate Limits there for yourself. It's usually located around this section here, Basic.Settings.Output, select file, select recording files. You can put it anywhere you want overall within the basic settings area, which would be down here, right here. So you can just add it to a line for yourself, and it's good to go wherever. But if you want to jump back to it, and if you know where it's at, I just did it like it shows in this example here. So the lines may not match there because, you know, this is already 739 and that's like 374. So this must be an earlier version of OBS back in 2016. So this is an older posting, but it still works today, surprisingly. So what I did is that I did Control F, and then I searched for this line of code here that it shows right above, which was Basic.Settings.Output.select file, and it automatically jumps me down to my certain area here. And this line was not here. By default, one of the main pieces of information what it'll tell you is dynamic bitrate. So dynamically change bitrate to manage congestion, or dynamically change bitrate to make sure your stream outputs appropriately in case of frame rate drops or connection issues there. So that way things try to stay as smooth as possible. That's fine. That's totally understandable there. But what I was noticing is that the enforcing of the bitrate limits, like the high point of where the stream goes to on the bitrate going from 6,000 to 7,000 to 8,000 and above there, without me telling it to, that's a problem. So basically, you can take this line of code here. I'll put this in the notes below here for yourself to refer off of. But you can put this in here. It's a simple little change. It doesn't, dramatically change how OBS operates. It just adds a little extra check in the background that says, hey, make sure that the streaming service that you're posting to is meeting the correct limits there. We don't want to be going above, because if it goes above too many times, you'll be kicked off, usually, from my experience. And I've been kicked off a lot of times because of the encoding overload. So Basic.Settings.Output.EnforceBitrate, make sure everything matches exactly, capital letters, lowercase, all across, so everything, it picks it up accordingly. Basic.Settings.Output.EnforceBitrate, equal sign, the quotation marks, enforce streaming service bitrate limits, and then close out with the quotation marks there, and then just go ahead and save that, whether it be Notepad or Notepad++, and then close it out. That's the last thing that I found that finished up on making sure everything is topped off. Of course, out of all of that, the only other thing that you would have to worry about is just limits of your hardware and finding the right settings for your encoder, whether it be CPU or GPU, depending on your system there. So everyone's different on that, but the basic settings around that, which I just went over, are what we are referring off of to make sure it's as smooth as possible. So quick recap there. is admin mode. Make sure you have admin mode there if possible. There usually gives the best experience whenever trying to make changes and keeping your program as a priority in the system there. Making sure you have the right encoder based on your hardware, making sure your profile for your color is correct, so that way it outputs for devices as much as possible, and you don't have a lot of extra time that the system has to take to figure out what the proper colors are to put out to the network there. So profile colors there, make sure that's correct. Setting the above setting the above priority for OBS as well as in Task Manager for yourself to keep that on the front line of what needs to be done. Optional GPU scheduling if you use a GPU to go ahead and stream off of there for yourself to have a more up-to-date task line, and then opting to update the INI for OBS there for yourself, so that way it make sure to check for the bitrate limits, because apparently the program does not do that for me. So that's pretty much it. If there's any other questions or recommendations, you're more than welcome to comment below there for yourself. I'm always open to some more insight on the matter there, but give those a shot there, and have a good day and happy streaming. Take care.